Hi everyone, welcome back to Alice and the Giant Bookshelf. Today's video is all about the BookTube Prize Final, and it's my reviews and my ranking of the 6 books that I read for the final group. Hi everyone and welcome back to my channel, or welcome if you are new. My name's Alice and I have way too many books, and in spite of those way too many books, I did decide earlier in the year that I was going to judge the final of the BookTube Prize. And the BookTube Prize is a literary prize here on BookTube that is decided by booktubers, commenters, subscribers, anyone within the BookTube community can be a judge for this prize. The books now in each category, there's a fiction and there's non-fiction, are down to the final 6. I don't know the winner yet, but I have read the 6 books, and normally when I've done judging the earlier groups, I've recorded my thoughts on each book as I've gone along and then told you my ranking, but this time I decided to keep it a bit shorter and to give you the reviews as I rank them. I feel like my thoughts on this final group will be very different from a lot of other readers. There were certain things that I took into account that I think are not necessarily what other readers are looking for, but they are things that I am looking for. So going into this group, these are the 6 books that were in the final. So there were 2 that I had already read. One was Trespasses by Louise Kennedy. The other was Demon Copperhead by Barbara Kingsolver. You already know, if you've been here for a little while, what I think of Demon Copperhead. Those are the 2 I'd already read. There were 4 that I had still left to read, which were Trust by Hernan Diaz, Young Mungo by Douglas Stewart, Foster by Claire Keegan, and How High We Go in the Dark by Sequoia Nagamatsu. Today I wanted to take you through my reviews of these 6 books, my thoughts on them and why I've ranked them as I have, and I'm going to go from the book I've ranked in 6th place, finishing off with the book that I've ranked in 1st place. I actually have no idea how this final will go, because I'm going to say here at the outset, these are 6 really strong books, 6 really good books that are all really good in different ways. So very, very hard to call, extremely difficult judging decisions in this video. So I would say, if you've read these books, please do comment in the comments down below with your thoughts about them, whether you agreed or disagreed with me, but please be kind on where I've ranked them, because it was really, really tough to decide, and I will tell you along the way how I made these decisions. After finishing the final book, I did leave it for about a week before I decided to lock in those final rankings. Starting off with position number 6, my least favourite of the 6 books, which is not to say this is not a good book, because all 6 had good elements. I had already read this book prior to reading this group, and that was Trespasses by Louise Kennedy. I actually read this because it was on the Women's Prize for Fiction shortlist this year, and I read it during the Women's Prize plod along that I was hosting with Gemma from Gemma Books and Charlie from Charlie Book Reads. And if you watched any of those videos or my reviews of the books, you will know that Trespasses was not up there with one of my favourites, though I can see why other people liked it. Trespasses is a book set during the Troubles in Ireland in the 70s, and it's all about Kushla, who is a teacher, and an affair that she starts to have with a guy who is a lot older than her, who she meets in her family's pub that she helps in. For me personally, Trespasses isn't a favourite book, and that's why I've rated it last. I've rated it in last place because I was actually quite bored for a long amount of this book, and that's just me as a reader. This personally wasn't a particularly exciting book, although there are exciting things that happen in it. I didn't personally love the character of Kushla, and I think for a lot of people, whether you love or don't love this book will hinge on whether you get on with the character of Kushla. I personally didn't find her particularly interesting. I didn't find some things about Kushla particularly believable, and so this was not a book that I rated particularly highly. But I can see why other people enjoyed it. So that was my 6th position. And that was probably the easiest decision to make in this group, apart from maybe the top of the group as well. My problem that I had with ranking 4 of these books was that it was so tough. 4 of these books, the next 4 that I'm going to talk about, I just found so difficult to put in a ranking order. I think that books 5 to 2 were all absolutely excellent. I gave all of these books 4 stars, and there were some elements of them that went beyond 4 stars, I would say, but other elements that maybe I didn't like so much. So the book I'm going to talk about in 5th position, it actually quite pains me to put this so low in the group because it is a wonderful book, but it is a very, very short book, and I know that I shouldn't hold that against this book, but I found it so difficult to compare a tiny novella, in fact I would say a short story pretty much, to novels. So yeah, rightly or wrongly, the book that I've put in 5th position was Foster by Claire Keegan. Now, I thought Foster by Claire Keegan was beautifully written. I thought it had a lovely little story that was also very sad, and I really did love reading this, but it was approximately 70 or less pages. The pages were very well spaced, so to me it felt like an even shorter book than that. I read this in 2 sittings, I think, and it's lovely as a short story, but for me, I don't think that a short story or novella should probably win the BookTube Prize, because like Foster is probably the book in this group that is the most perfect whole story. It's lovely, really flawless writing, really excellent little character study, and it's a story about a girl who is sent to live with like foster parents, I guess, while her mother is having another baby, and she doesn't really know whether she will be going back or when she will be going back, but this girl just needs some love really, and yeah, it was a lovely little story. But I didn't feel like it was fair to have it further up the group, because although some of the other books that I've rated above this did have more points that I disliked, I decided eventually that overall, because they had more to get stuck into, they ended up rating higher for me. So that's what I did. It's really, really hard to compare short stories and also collections of short stories and interconnected short stories to novels. So I will say that. But yeah, it ended up in 5th position because of that really. In 4th position, I put Young Mungo by Douglas Stewart. Young Mungo is definitely a book that I could see winning this prize, and I think it's a really well crafted book. Now, this is Douglas Stewart's 2nd book, and his 1st book, Shuggie Bain, won the Booker Prize, I believe, in around about 2020, I think. But I haven't actually read that book, so this was my first experience of reading Douglas Stewart. And the reason I've rated this as low as 4th is because I don't personally enjoy reading books that are this intense and this sad and this bleak. So yeah, I did like the character of Mungo. I think I would have found this quite difficult to read on the page. I ended up listening to this on audio because there is a lot of sort of Glaswegian dialect in it. This one follows Mungo, who is a 15-year-old boy growing up in Glasgow in, I think it's like the 90s, I would have to say, early 90s. He forms a friendship and then a relationship with a Catholic boy called James, and for various reasons their relationship is obviously a bit of a forbidden one, because of their religions, their families, and the fact that they are also both young gay men. So I thought that young Mungo was incredibly sad and emotional, and this has a very, very dark storyline running through it as well. There are two different timelines here. One is kind of as Mungo is getting to know James, and Mungo's mother struggles with alcohol addiction, and so the story of their family and his mother and James is all in one timeline, and the other timeline is kind of the timeline you're introduced to at the beginning, where young Mungo is sent off on a fishing trip with two men who his mother has met at AA. I mean, this book is absolutely brutal and it's absolutely brilliantly written. It's a book I'm grateful that I have picked up because of the BookTube Prize, but equally it is a book that is not the sort of book that I would read for enjoyment, because I don't like, the themes were too heavy for me to really enjoy this book, which is the only reason why I've put it into fourth. It actually does pain me to put this book in fourth, because I have thought about it since, and I do think it's a really good book. I couldn't see how this would end, and I thought the ending kind of pulled off what I would hope for from a really bleak book. I couldn't put it any higher because there were three other books in this group that I felt were just more the sort of book that I personally want to read and that I don't find so very dark and depressing. So that was why Young Mungo ended up in fourth. In third place, I've put Trust by Hernan Diaz. Now, this didn't get any higher than third, but I think it's an amazing book. And the reason it didn't get any higher than third is because although I thought this book was amazing, in the end, the first section of this book is so dry and so boring. And if I would have been reading this book for myself, there is a high chance that I would have DNF'd in the very first section. So Trust is a book that very cleverly uses 4 different versions of the one story kind of thing. In Trust's 4 very different sections, we're following like a sort of financier, very successful rich man in New York in the kind of 1920s onwards to the 1930s, a guy who has made himself very successful on the stock market. And the first section of this book is presented as a novel about a very slightly fictionalized version of this guy, but it is supposed to be a work of fiction. Second part is like an unfinished autobiography of the character who was clearly fictionalized in the first part. The third part, we follow a really interesting woman who is looking back on the time that she spent with this guy to help him write his autobiography, and it's kind of her overlapping story trying to get to the bottom of the mystery of him and his wife and why the novel was so different from what he told her himself in his autobiography. And the final section, I won't say what it's about, but it's yet another perspective, and this is really, to me, a book about truth and how facts and reality are presented to us, and how that can be, how the reality can be very different to what is presented to us. So I thought that Trust was very clever, and Trust recently jointly won the Pulitzer Prize this year with Demon Copperhead, and ever since then I'd really wanted to see why. Why did it jointly win with Demon Copperhead? How could it be as good as Demon Copperhead was my question. But although for me personally Trust doesn't achieve the heights of Demon Copperhead, it is a very clever book, and I really enjoyed it more and more as the book went along. The first part of the first part, like the first chapter of the novel section in the first part, was very boring. There's a lot of talk throughout this book about the stock market, which I wasn't that interested in. Although it had its boring moments, this book really pulled it off, in my opinion. It was so clever, it had such a great finish to it, without any spoilers. So if this book had not stuck the landing, I could see it coming in like 5th in this group, maybe even last, but it did. It stuck at the ending, and I thought it was a great book. I thought it was a really accomplished book. So much so actually that it had me doubting putting it in 3rd. The reason I've put it in 3rd and kept it there is because of that element of boredom. There were a few times in that book where I was bored. Whereas in this book, How High We Go in the Dark by Sequoia Nagamatsu, which is my pick for the 2nd spot, I was not bored in this book. That's how I've done it really. I've really rated this group purely on my enjoyment. I feel like that's the only honest way I could rank these books, was how much did I enjoy them. And I think the only book that's sort of lost out in the shuffle really is Foster, because although I did really enjoy that, there wasn't enough of it to elevate it above the other books that I maybe enjoyed large parts of them, but not quite all. So, in 2nd place, How High We Go in the Dark. This was the book before I read the group that I was most interested in reading, and it turned out that it is most my cup of tea out of the books, unsurprisingly. So this is, again, quite a clever book, and this is a collection of interconnected short stories that are all about like a future time with a big apocalyptic event. Basically, in the beginning of this book, a virus gets discovered and a plague happens, and there are various stories in this, and they ranged from like very good short stories to absolutely brilliant short stories for me. That there were some that I didn't think were as good, but this book I think still had more enjoyability than Trust, even though I think Trust was really good. And I actually think, looking back on it, that Trust is maybe a better book overall than this. There were still parts of Trust where I was bored, which is why I didn't put it in 2nd, and I did put this in 2nd. There was a story in this that absolutely broke me. It was so sad, and that was called City of Laughter. I think that is absolutely the strongest in this book. I would give that story 5 stars. The rest of the stories varied, but I don't think there was one that I thought was sort of less than probably a 4 star, maybe 3.5 at the very lowest. I'm not certain that I completely understood the choices made for the ending of the book, but I did think that overall How High We Go in the Dark was brilliantly done, very well written, and I thought most of the stories had excellent characters and really developed their story that related back to this plague really well. I just thought this was a great book that I would undoubtedly reread at some point, or I would certainly reread parts of it, if not all. Really liked this one. So I feel like this book has benefited from being more my genre maybe than the others. So that's why this is in second. I wondered when I started reading this group whether anything would top Demon Copperhead, because as I said, I'd already read Demon Copperhead by Barbara Kingsolver and Trespasses by Louise Kennedy before I started reading the books specifically for this group. And nothing has toppled Demon Copperhead, you'll be unsurprised to know. This is still my top favourite book that I've read this year. I don't think I probably need to go on about it more here. This is a very, very clever retelling of David Copperfield by Charles Dickens, and it was relocated by Barbara Kingsolver to the Appalachian region in the US and set during the opioid crisis in the 90s, and follows main character Demon as he grows up and tries to overcome his struggles. And I just think that this is a book that I will read again and again and still get more from. And I just think it's such an amazing accomplishment by Barbara Kingsolver. I can't believe anyone has written a book this amazing. It's going to take a long time to top this. So yeah, that is my wrap up of the BookTube Prize Final group that I read. Absolutely rooting for Demon Copperhead to win this prize. But if it doesn't, it has already won 2 prizes this year, the Women's Prize for Fiction and the Pulitzer Prize, and I think it deserves both those prizes. I think it deserves to win this prize as well, but it is quite a chunky book. I don't know what my fellow judges will have made of it. I think that most of what I hear about this book is very, very positive, but I do know that there are people who haven't enjoyed it as much as me, so I really can't call which way this group will go, but I hope it goes to Demon Copperhead. I personally won't be sad if really any of these books have won the BookTube Prize. I personally wouldn't pick Trespasses as a winner in this group. I do think that Young Mungo and Trust are in with a very good chance. I think I'm probably going to be in the minority as rating How High We Go in the Dark as highly as I have. I think it's a great debut though, and I can't wait to read more from that author. So I have really enjoyed judging the BookTube Prize this year. This was my first time judging the final round, although I judged an earlier round last year. Those were my thoughts such as they are. I definitely think that I preferred recording my thoughts as I went along, because I haven't remembered them as well by doing it this way as I did that way, but there we go. By now you will know who won the BookTube Prize, and I cannot wait to find out for myself. So if you have enjoyed this video today, please do give it a like. Please do consider subscribing if you haven't already. If you also judged the BookTube Prize, let me know in the comments. What was your order? Which was your favourite book? Anything like that. If you didn't judge the BookTube Prize but have read any of these 6, do let me know what your thoughts were. I really felt that the only way to judge these books that were so very different from each other, all of them, was to go with which ones I had genuinely enjoyed the most. I really went with my heart and my gut rather than anything more concrete than that. Thank you for watching today, and I will hope very much to see you all again soon for another video all about books here on Alice and the Giant Bookshelf. Bye for now.